Chapter 10. Monday afternoon. That afternoon was even more nerve-wracking than the morning. The men from Christie's hadn't taken a break until late, and Doreen was pretty antsy by the time they finally got back to work. With the living room cleaned out, she was smiling a sigh of relief, but she knew the upstairs would take equally as long. The bed was a huge problem. She led the way, and the men started working on the vanity. When she heard muttered curses, she decided she needed to be anywhere but here. She crept downstairs and stood with her hands on her hips, taking stock of the living room. "Muggs, what do you think we should do from here?" Muggs just woofed at her side, but he kept going back upstairs to where the men were. She'd been forced to clip a leash on him and keep him with her all the time. He wanted to help everyone. With no major living room furniture to sit on now, she put a couple odd chairs she presumed had zero value into the middle of the room, and brought out the vacuum to give the rug a thorough cleaning. The rug was another piece she thought was supposed to go too. It was supposed to be extremely expensive, but that didn't mean Christie's was interested in it. She gave it as good a cleaning as she possibly could, and then worked all around the rest of the living room. The remaining two upright chairs looked modern. She found it odd that Nan had even bought them. But maybe it was at a different stage of her life, and she was looking for something more contemporary. 3 lamps remained, one that was pretty rickety, and Doreen wasn't sure it had any value, and the other 2 weren't bad, if she could find something to set them on. And of course, that was another problem. She had 2 pot chairs, but was that all she wanted in here? Using the vacuum brush, she cleaned behind the door, around the base of the stairs and down the hallway, making sure she got as much of the living room itself back to prime sparkling condition. With the chairs set off the rug, she waited until Scott came down to ask him about the pieces. She was gratified when he appeared, talking to one of the guys, only to have his gaze catch on the rug, and a slow smile dawned. Her fist gripped the vacuum handle as she waited for him to bounce down the last few steps. Hesitantly she said, "I know it's not part of the set, but I don't know if it was you or Fen who said the rug was valuable." Scott wasn't talking now. He had a magnifying glass in his hand as he studied the weaves and the hooks. Was that the right word for the loops of rug as it pulled through? He had the corner flipped over, so he could see the backing on it. One of the other men bent down, and together they muttered. Finally Scott straightened and said, "Are you attached to this?" She gave him a droll smile. "No," she said. "Is there a good reason to not be attached to it?" "About 15 grand worth," he said. "Maybe more, I can't really tell yet. It needs a good cleaning, but I don't want you to do it," he rushed in. She frowned at him. "Meaning I might ruin it?" "I can't say," he said, "but we have to determine what these fibers are and then give it the proper cleaning for that material." Considering she probably would have just taken a vacuum mop, one of those cheap rentals from the grocery store, and scrubbed it over, she was glad he'd said that. "If you can get 15,000 for it," she said slowly, "then you should try. Don't forget we have a commission on that too." She mentally backtracked the fortune, coming down to a nice little windfall. She said, "It's pretty nice." "It is," he said, appraising it closely. "There is a chance," he said, "that it could be worth more, but I have to clean up some of these corners in order to see." She bent down to the corner he was talking about. "It looks like a signature is there." "Why would that be?" "Artisans used to put their signatures in as a series of special stitches when they finished a piece, signifying it was their work," he explained. "But somewhere along the line this has been rebacked, or a new backing put on it." "Or it was put on at the same time," she suggested. "That's possible too," he said. "Which would put it around the late 18th century. She looked at him, her eyes round. "And yet it's only worth 15,000? No, he said. "I didn't say that. It could be worth 3 times that." "I don't know. It depends on what the signature says, which is why I don't want you to clean it. Any solvent you use could potentially damage not only the fibers, But wipe away this signature. I can take it with me and we can try. She nodded. I know Fen said it was valuable, but I don't remember if he gave me any figure. I'll check my notes. Not to worry, he said. Once we get all the pieces back to Christie's, I can get it assessed by another specialist and give you a full accounting. She nodded. That would be lovely if you could, she said with a beaming smile. He turned to the two men with him on the main floor and said, because this is here and ready, I suggest we pack it and load up before we start in on the other pieces up in the bedroom. They nodded, then headed to the truck, pulled out more packing blankets, and she thought some tissue paper or something. She watched in amazement as the entire surface of the rug was covered with the tissue, and then it was slowly rolled lengthwise, the long side forward, until the entire rug was packed up into a tight bundle. Then they took the packing blanket and wrapped all around the outside. Finally, it was tied together and the ends closed off. And before she knew it, even though it had taken at least an hour, if not two, it was tossed onto the men's shoulders and carefully carried outside to the truck. Some sort of old rug had been left behind, had been underneath the nicer rug. She pointed at it and said, "Why would that be down here?" Scott looked at it, made a funny face, and said, "People do weird things. Maybe it was to protect the good rug from the flooring." She wasn't sure why any rug should be protected from the wood flooring that she now saw definitely needed refinishing. She grabbed the vacuum again as Scott headed back upstairs, and the two moving men came back from the truck and joined him. She vacuumed all around the old ugly piece of rug, wondering if she should just toss it. Muggs, hating the vacuum hose, finally came over and sniffed as soon as she shut it off. She looked at him and said, "It smells weird, doesn't it?" He sniffed to the point he was actually lifting a corner of it. Hey, she said, pulling him back gently. "That's pretty strong snogs you got there, buddy." But he strained at the leash and refused to be budged. Sighing, she pulled the vacuum handle back, laid it gently down on the hardwood floor. Now she was worried that this old rug had value too, and she crouched beside Muggs at that corner he was sniffing at, and lifted it up. As she flipped it back, she stared in amazement. There appeared to be an inset handle flush within the wooden floor, all stained with the same finish. She sure wouldn't have seen it without moving out all this furniture and the rug under the rug. But for Muggs's barking, she wouldn't have noticed, it was so well done. She slowly rolled back the piece of junky rug, realizing Scott was quite correct. It was just a piece of old tattered something or other that didn't even have a finished edge. Somebody had just cut it and put it down and then placed a good one on top of it. It was also very thin. She rolled it up carefully, and since it wasn't too big or too heavy, she dragged it outside on the porch and laid it over the front railing. Then she came back with the vacuum and cleaned up all the dirt and dust underneath it. How was it even possible? There was so much. Muggs alternated between straining at the leash away from the vacuum and toward the secret space. The only reason she'd had any idea the handle existed was because of him. She also didn't want the men upstairs to know about it. Not until she inspected it further. She walked back over to the spot, her fingers gently going over the piece of wood that appeared to lift, and checking around to make sure nobody was watching her, she tried to pull up the handle. But it wouldn't budge. She frowned, looked at it again, and gently tapped the wood all around it. She heard a hollow echo. Excited, she walked into the kitchen and came back with a butter knife. She wasn't sure this was the best thing to do, but, considering the condition of the floors, she thought it worth a try. She gently scraped along the edges of what she thought was a handle. But even after that effort, again when she pulled, nothing shifted. She frowned and said, "Well, Muggs, we're wrong sometimes. It looks like it's this time." He just shot her a look as if to say, "No. I'm not wrong. You're wrong." Just then she heard footsteps again. She bolted to her feet, picked up the butter knife, and casually walked back into the kitchen, placing the knife in the sink. As she returned to the living room, the men were gently carrying the vanity mirror outside, followed by each of the drawers wrapped up in what appeared to be more bubble wrap. As they came back in again, they brought rolls of more bubble wrap. She watched in amazement. She wanted to go upstairs and see what they were doing, but knew her bedroom would be chaos with so many people in it. Just then Scott came back down. He whistled at the living room and said, "I can't believe how big this room is now." She watched his gaze dart around. He glanced over the hardwood floor straight to the pot chairs, grimaced before focusing on her. But he didn't appear in any way to notice the flooring. He motioned at the chairs. "I guess that'll give you something to sit on until you figure out what else you want in here." She smiled at him. "And I gather from your response to seeing them, they have zero value." "I'm sure they have value to someone," he assured her. "But not in the antiques world. Those are cheap knockoffs from anywhere in the last 10 years. Hardly any historical value." He looked around. "You've done incredibly well, particularly adding the rug to this collection of yours going to Christie's." He stood in the middle of the living room and said, "Of course the floor is pretty damaged." "That's not what I expected," she said. "I figured the rug would have protected it." "That just goes to show you the floor had a lot of use before the rug was laid," he said, "and maybe that's why your Nan bought it. Not only for its antique value but because her living room floor needed to be redone." He pointed at the scratches and the dullness to it. "But it is true hardwood," he said, "so you could get it refinished and it would look splendid." He smiled as he looked around. "Right, and I never did give you those names of somebody to look at the small stuff, did I?" He walked over to a vase that had blue and white markings. "I don't think this can be a Ming vase," he said, "but it's sure a nice copy." At the term Ming, her ears perked up. If it was real, huge money would be involved, right? He chuckled. "Thousands again." "May I?" he asked as he reached up a hand. She nodded. As he lifted it, there were sounds of rattling on the inside. She shrugged and said, "I've never even looked inside." Holding it gently, he slowly reached his hand in and came out with several huge marbles. He chuckled. "Remnants of the children who lived in the house," he suggested. "And this is why I love antiques. Because some people have such irreverence for them, that they become common household items that everyone, including children, can enjoy." He handed her the marbles to hold, and she stared at them. They were bigger than she remembered from her childhood. She wasn't even sure these could be classified as marbles because something appeared to be inside them, maybe like a bug or whatnot. She shrugged and stuck them in her pocket. She waited with bated breath while Scott studied the vase. He looked inside at the base and then at a mark on the bottom. "Well," he said, letting out his breath slowly, "I'm not the expert on this, but this might be the real thing." His tone was so dazed, as if this was the last thing he expected. She stepped forward and said, "Really?" He nodded. "I need a place to lay it down, so I can take some pictures, and I'll contact a colleague of mine." At that, she wanted to jump around and scream. Instead, she picked up her phone and called Nan. "Hey, Nan." "Oh, I do love having you close," Nan cried out cheerfully. "What can I help you with now?" she asked. "Did you get any closer to finding out if Penny was a murderer?" No, she said. "That's not what I'm calling about. Remember that big blue and white vase on your mantel?" "Oh, that Ming vase?" she asked in a loud voice. Scott's head turned and looked at Doreen's phone, and then he glanced up at her. "Ask her if she has a receipt," he said. "I heard that," her grandmother said. "Not sure about a receipt. I had it appraised for insurance once though," she said thoughtfully. "I'm not exactly sure where that is either now." Doreen just closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. "I'm still trying to find any paperwork," she said, turning to look around the living room. "Now that the living room furniture is out in the truck, I felt sure they would be here somewhere." And her gaze went to the floorboards she had tried to lift. "Do you know anything about this vase, Nan?" "Sure, I picked it up at a garage sale years ago, she said. I thought it was lovely, and then one of those antique roadshows came through town and I asked one of the experts. He tried to buy it from me back then, she said. For quite a bit of money, as I recall. Do you remember how much money? Doreen asked. Oh my, this was quite a few years ago now, and I think he offered me $7,000 or $8,000. Doreen's gaze locked on Scott's and his eyebrows shot up. He nodded slowly. She smiled. Do you have any problem with me selling it? Of course not, my dear. I told you. All those antiques in there are your inheritance. And you need to probably sell them all, sooner rather than later. You need the money now, not when I die, she said. Besides, things in that house probably need to be fixed. You can certainly see the wear and tear on the living room floor now that the rug is gone too. Oh right, Nan cried out. I forgot about the rug. I paid a pretty penny for that quite a few years ago. Yeah, we could use receipts for that too. They're all together. Whenever you find them, you'll find them all, Nan said cheerfully. Any idea where she got it? Scott asked from her side. Nan, do you remember where you got the rug? Somebody who was selling off his antiques, dear. He tried to tell me it was worth a lot of money. I figured it was just him telling me that he needed more than I was offering. You know what negotiating is like. But did he have any proof? Nope, I don't think so. That's why I wasn't too interested in paying a higher price, she said. Of course he tried to tell me there was some sort of mark on the underside. But all I found was some washed out names. Really wasn't a whole lot there to prove what he was saying. But he was also dying, and trying to clean out his property before his family came in and sold it all for pennies. That makes sense, Doreen said. She looked to Scott and lifted her shoulders as if to say, what else can I ask? Scott nodded and said, you need to find those receipts. Oh, is that the appraiser there? Nan asked through the phone. Hi, I'm Doreen's grandmother. And didn't her voice turn flirty? Doreen just rolled her eyes. Yes, this is Scott Rawson here, Doreen said. He's the man from Christie's. You might as well have him take the vase and get it properly appraised, she said. I'm sure somebody at Christie's will know the value of it. You know what? You can be a specialist in a certain area of antiques, but it's pretty hard to be a specialist in all of them, and that's why I didn't know anything about the rug. It's the only rug I've ever bought, but I loved it. She said, did you recognize the hummingbirds all through it? Doreen winced. I don't think I did, she said. Over the years it got rather dirty. Nan said thoughtfully, speaking of which, I don't think I ever cleaned that rug. I wonder if that devalued it. Scott piped up. You probably retained the value because you didn't, he said. Now we can treat it properly and get it cleaned up without damaging it. Oh good, Nan said. I always did hate house cleaning.